Victor is not here yet, right?
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining our webinar on the rise of self-sovereign identity in the new economy. We're just waiting for more people to join. Sorry about that. We're just waiting for a couple more people to join and then we can get started. Thank you for your patience. Hi, everyone. We will be starting our session now. I'm handing it over to our moderator for this evening, who will be Imran Bilkasim. Imran, over to you.
Thanks, Nicole. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you to the panelists who joined us. Thank you to the audience who joined us as well. Today, is self-sovereign identity as a platform for identification and credentials management. I'm joined by an exclusive set of people who obviously are specialists in this area of technology. Let me warmly welcome Victor from FlexID, who's joining us from all the way from Africa to talk about self-sovereign ID. I'm also joined by Sanjay Mendes, whose expertise lies in the area of blockchain, representing Bridge Advisory and Consulting. Also joined by Kanishka. We all know Kanishka very well, founder of media and a few other interesting tech companies involved in the whole payment space. These, I also have Sadun, country manager for MasterCard for Sri Lanka and Maldives, joining us as well. So you can see we have a mix of local and overseas expertise joining us here, which will give us an insights into what's happening around the world, what's happening around the region, and what can we learn in terms of adoption in Sri Lanka. I also encourage participants to either use the chat window in Zoom or use the Q&A option in your Zoom client to ask any questions or pose any questions to the audience that you might have during the session. Let me kick off the session by inviting Victor to give us a little bit of a perspective of what is SSID, where is this coming from, what's the relevance of it, to essentially give the audience an insight of what it can actually do, and then we'll get on to the next set of sessions. Thank you. Victor, you want to take over?
Yeah, thank you, Imran, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Victor, the co-founder and CEO of FlexID. And in a nutshell, what SSID is self-sovereign identity. And this is a new method of storing personal credentials and digital credentials without the need for centralized parties or centralized authorities. In this particular case, maybe it's a credit bureau, or maybe it's any other third party that is in charge of an individual's data. When we talk about SSID, we mean you as the user are in full control 100% of all your data and all your information. And you have the ability to authorize which organizations and which institutions have access to that particular information. And what this particularly does, especially for business and enterprise, is it drastically reduces the cost of verification and the cost for integration and the need to integrate with multiple parties, as the only thing you now need to do is to integrate directly with for example, the SSID platform API, like we have with FlexID, where you'll now be able to verify anyone within the network from across the world virtually instantly.
Thanks, Victor. I have a few follow-up questions based on that. But let me just hand over to Sanjay. Sanjay, so Victor gave us a perspective of what it is. I have some leading questions, and I'm sure the audience will also have similar questions around it. Can you tell us, how does SSID actually work? What's the technology behind it? How does it benefit, and how does it actually work?
Okay. Thanks, Imran. Hi, everyone. So to start off and continue where Victor left us, is that FlexID runs on a blockchain, right? And the blockchain that we use is Algorand, which is one of the most secure blockchains available at the moment. It is also a third generation blockchain, as we call it. First, as you know, is Bitcoin. Second generation was Ethereum. And after that, there were quite a lot of new blockchains which came, and Algorand is one such protocol. And it is known to be one of the most secure blockchain networks available today. So that is one. How it works is that you, as a customer or a user, has your credentials saved on your digital identity wallet. Why is it different? As you know, most people use Google to log in into an e-commerce site or their Facebook login, right? When you do that, what happens is your credentials are actually saved in Google or Facebook, right? And you are actually their product. That is how they make money. And as you know, Facebook and Google has been having so many discussions and being in trouble for identity theft and so many things. Whereas that does not happen when it is on a blockchain network, because you own the identity. There is no central party controlling it, and you share it with a third party, right? It is up to you. So this is why it's called a self-sovereign ID. The next level is you need to get it verified. So you add on, let's say, your passport, your name, all of that, and then you go to a verifier who will look at it and verify, saying all the information that you have added to your self-sovereign ID is correct, and that verifier again is stored on the blockchain. So let me put it into a local context. Let's say a bank, NSB, for example, gets into this network. They will be the verifier. And then as a customer, when I show my ID online to anyone, it will say it is verified by NSB. When I want to go to another bank, let's take another example, commercial bank. Commercial bank will say, okay, I will accept the verification done by NSB. Then what will happen is that they don't need to do the verification all over again. It's already pre-done. They can onboard the customer. So this need not be only in the banking sector. It can be club memberships, schools, education, medical, all of that. When you go into an area, you don't have to do multiple verifications, and the security comes from it being in the blockchain. You know for a fact that this cannot be changed or not.
Thanks, Sanjay. I do have a few questions, but I'll first maybe have a chat with Sadun. Sadun, obviously representing a global brand called MasterCard, which all of us know of. How do you see the evolution of SSID, and where do you see the applicability of it, and how would institutions adopt it based on your experience, doing various initiatives at MasterCard?
Yeah, thanks, Imran. I think before I speak about the SSID, let me kind of put the identification and the evolution of identity, as you said, into the context. And I kind of love oversimplification of things, so I'll probably try to oversimplify it for the benefit of users who may not be really conversant about SSID. So when we talk about the identity, we have to really look at what identity is as a definition in the first place, because a lot of people argue now the identity is not an asset, or is identity as asset, right? Because if it's an asset, you should be able to easily transfer it to another person. So I think one of the fundamental mistakes that people do is they kind of mix the identity along with the identifiers. What are the identifiers? Identifiers would be the attributes that we use, what qualifies for a person or entity. And identifiers are the attributes that builds the identity of an individual or an entity. So identifiers could be their data itself, or it could be passwords, biometrics, behavior analysis, all that. Now, when you look at, as an example, to get an identifier or a credential, we call it, you need to have at least about 3 entities. You need to have a person or an entity, we call it a subject or a holder. You need to have a issuer who issues the identifier or a ID, we call it in the normal terms, and then somebody who verifies it, right? So basically, even if you look at the typical identity cards that we all have, or the passports that we all have, that's issued by the government, and it's issued to you, and you are the holder in this case. Government is the issuer, and you go and give it to a bank, and bank trusts the government on the face value, and then they accept that as an identifier of that particular person. So that's how it works in the typical context. Now we have been doing that for quite some time in the payments world, because I represent that. Especially if you talk about 3DS process, you're following a similar process like that for payment gateway transactions, where you have an issuer of credentials, and then you have a customer, and somebody is there, which is typically the merchant, who is verifying the credentials provided by the customer with the issuer, right? That's where you get a OTP or a authentication, and then you verify that with the customer. So looking at these identifiers of different aspects, now good old days, we only used to have passwords, as Sanjay said. And now that has moved to biometrics, active biometrics, and now the world has even moved into passive biometrics, human verifications, etc. And now we have even come into an era of risk-based authentication, where you don't even prompt anything to the customer, but we kind of build a profile to the customer and authenticate the customer based on the risk of that particular activity. Now, if you look at the banking sector specifically, the evolution is that good old days we had banking applications with probably a single login. You access one single database to do your banking services. But however, now if you look at banking services, it has also evolved into neobanks, large fintechs, and very sophisticated merchants, etc., who might use different services from different service providers. So as an example, there could be one neobank which authenticates the customer by themselves, but also it will connect to multiple other places to get information, provide services, especially with open banking coming in, to give additional services to the customer, like let's say credit scoring system or loan origination system, etc. So these sophisticated connectivities have to verify the customer with multiple data points moving forward. Now, to do that, the solution that they came up some time back is, as Sanjay said, to work with all these large merchants like Facebook, Google, rather not really the merchant, the large tech players, to have a profile built there, digital, and then use them as a authentication mechanism. But the challenges that we have there is, what if one of these services go down? I'm not saying it happens, but let's say tomorrow Google says we are not giving services anymore. What happens to the services that you've been using to authenticate yourselves by using Google or Facebook, for that matter? You suddenly become a refugee of different multiple applications. It's like you're going to a university and you get a degree, and after some time your university closes down, and nobody is there to verify your degree, right? So nobody, you cannot claim that you have a degree from X place because there's no such a place existing. So it's similar to that, right? So what if that particular entity goes missing and you become a digital refugee? So that's a bit of a challenge that we have. The second one is, you don't necessarily need to provide all your data for somebody to authenticate yourself. Now in physical world, as an example, let's say you go to some place, let's say to buy alcohol, as an example, you have to probably verify your age. How you would verify your age is by giving you identity card or the driving license. But then the verifier, the merchant or the other party, can see all the information that is there on the face of the identity card. You might not need to give everything to the other person to verify. All that they want to know is you're above 18 years old. So that's a bit of a challenge. Even on a online world, if you authenticate by using, let's say, Facebook or Google or whatever the other mechanisms available. Sometimes it's asked for so many other details than what you usually use to authenticate yourself. So whether you need to really give everything to the other party to verify yourself, or whether you should really give the information that the other party requests to verify yourself is the second aspect that that is in the question for SSIDs. Third one is the interoperability. Let's say if you use one application, and let's say passport as an example, you use the passport to log into certain domestic applications in a country. What happens if you go overseas and use a similar service? You will not be able to authenticate yourself. I have so many other examples as well, Imran. But these are the main three concerns that is there with the existing authentication processes, and I think that's the reason to for the world to think of another way of authenticating yourselves. And the question arises whether you can have your own identity, and I think SSID is catering to that question very well. So I'll stop there, and maybe we can take up questions later.
Thanks, Arun. Thank you for that very elaborative explanation, and it's very useful to understand context and what kind of problems are we really trying to resolve by using evolving technology like SSID. I'll turn the mic over to Kanishka. Kanishka, you obviously do a lot of work in the local financial services industry. The topic of EKYC is obviously very popular for the last few months, but still there is a need for each customer to be able to sign up multiple forms at each bank they choose to transact with as a part of this process. Obviously, we've come some way in terms of trying to automate some of these things, but how do you really see the advent of technology like SSID playing into the space of EKYC, which is an important process of user onboarding in a bank? How do you see such technology really kind of adding value to the local financial services industry in terms of EKYC and various other measures that we need from a regulatory standpoint to drive identity transformation and control?
Right. So thank you, Imran, first of all, for inviting me to today's discussion. So I will basically build my story on what Sandun, Sanjay, as well as Victor said. Now, if you look at identity is the fundamental asset for anybody to start an interaction, right? So that is where we basically talk about KYCs. Now we call about EKYCs, and now we have video KYCs. Also, we've got medical KYCs. So all of these will start from identity. So as Sandun very correctly said, there should be an issuer, you as the person, and the verifier, right? Now, if you look at in Sri Lanka, the financial institutes as well as banks, we follow a traditional method of doing a KYC. So every time you step into a bank, you need to fill in a form, right? So that form will basically ask the basic questions to get to know your customer well. Right? Within the same bank, the second challenge is they have the second financial product that they want to offer for the customer. Sometimes you may need to go through providing the same information plus some additional information. Let's say you wanted to take a credit card. Again, a similar form has to be filled, but there will be some additional information required, right? But take the case where customer walks into the first bank and then he fills out and goes to the second bank. Again, he has to basically do the forms from the beginning, right? Now, this is from a customer's point of the duplication of work. And the second thing is customer is declaring and basically filling out the form, and banks, apart from the identities issued, there is no any other way of cross-checking whether the customer has provided the same information across all the banks and financial institutions. So the need of the hour is basically how do we create that central intelligence within the banking and financial ecosystem where customer will basically be verified at one entity, and that verified information can be shared across the board. And if you take the customer's journey, generally, I may today go and open up a bank account, but 6 months down the line, probably the work line would have changed, my home address would have changed, and I'm going to the second institution and I'm giving the latest information. The first institution will never have an opportunity to get updated unless otherwise I interact with that institute for another matter. So where do we basically get the most updated information? So those are some of the challenges. And the other biggest challenge in financial institutes which we face today is how do we transfer this data? Because this data is not their data, actually it's customers' data. So now the authenticity and the control has to be given to the customer, right? So those are some of the challenges we see, right? So our journey starts with the first asset as an identity information providing. Then we build on to KYC. Then beyond that, we also have certain verifications which we need while we are in the process of interacting with the financial institute. That is probably transaction verification. It could be basically latest information verification, right? It could be sharing of certain information required for certain financial applications or new products, right? So on the other hand, people would want to have their control. They would want to still keep what they wanted to share with them, the control, right? We know that data protection bill is already been publicized, so there should be an act coming very soon. So those kind of things are also around, right? Then on the other hand, businesses wanted to be more proactive and they wanted to have that intelligence within them and to have more simplified processes for customers to onboard. So that is where this opportunity comes for somewhat of a shared, reusable identity and KYC platform. So I think in that sense, getting into blockchain would be the ideal solution, and that has all the merits, or rather it will address all the current pain points which we see in the industry. So to Imran.
Thank you, Kanishka. I have a few follow-up questions, and then I'll potentially ask that during the latter part of the session. Sanjay, you mentioned that the user, so the identity is not owned by any institution or any middle party or a broker or anyone. So you also mentioned it's a user who holds the identity. So who actually owns the identity in this case? Who actually authorizes the usage of that? Who does that?
So in terms of authorization, it is the user who authorizes the use of the identity, right? So the user will get an alert saying, okay, bank X wants your data. Do you want authorized to share it? So that's how it will be, always from the user, which gives the authority to take that. And adding to that, Imran, like Kanishka brought up a very varied section about the banking sector and the troubles that they have, right? If you look at the world's unbanked population, right, it is about 1.7 billion, right, of which Africa has 80%, Middle East has 67%, and South Asia 58% unbanked, right? East Asia has 59%, and Latin America also has a very, very high amount, 65%, right? So this is one reason that SSID and digital payments are becoming popular. If you have been reading the news recently, a couple of days ago actually, Warren Buffett's company, right, invested $1.5 billion in a new bank. And this is a person who called Bitcoin rat poison, right? So a couple of years back. So Berkshire Capital, which is Warren Buffett's company, right, actually divested $3 billion out of Visa and Master and invested into neobanking, right? So this is where the trend is going globally, which we can see.
Yeah, thanks, Sanjay. So if the user holds the ID, what the user loses?
Yeah. So if the user loses it, this is where it is important. Like in any institution, the story on blockchain is that you're your own bank, right? So you are your own custodian, and we give a set of private keys, public keys, and password where you call the seed phrases, where the user can store it. Also, this question has been asked whether we can do a custodial service for, if it is a country, for example, because as you very well said, users can be careless, right? They say, okay, we've lost it. Sadhu brought up that thing, what if the university closes? The same way, the user comes and says, okay, I lost my credentials, what do you do? Again, you can have a deactivator which can be operated by the user themselves, right? So these are some of the developments which are happening, where he has maybe 3 areas of verification, whether biometrics, facial recognition, and some of the other documents, which he can represent onto the ID system, and they can recover it. Again, it is a user who recovers it. He does not go to a company and say, I lost my credentials, I want to get it back. It is the user's ability to do it. And Flex ID has a solution for that as well. I think Victor can elaborate a little bit more on recovery. We spoke about it last week.
Yeah. So one is, Victor, the whole process of recovery. Second is, there's an interesting question from the audience. How do you prevent a single user or a consumer from getting 2 IDs, 2 or more identities for the same person? How do you prevent that?
So yeah, I'll start off with the first question, which is on recovery. So the way SSID essentially works is that you as the user are in control of your private key. And what that essentially means is, unless you have a form of a custodial solution where you are able to have a backup of that particular private key in an extremely secure way, virtually nobody else is able to recover it for you except yourself. So there's definitely need to employ different mechanisms of making sure users don't find themselves in that particular predicament. However, as in any particular ecosystem, you are going to have outliers. So what we've essentially done at Flex ID is we've developed an array of different solutions that would allow us to provide users with a much more softer landing pad in the event that they actually face this particular challenge. So for example, if you're a user who's using our SSID application, using one of our low access interfaces, whether it's USSD, which requires offline, or you're using WhatsApp for low internet penetration areas, we'll be able to offer you a pseudo custodial solution that would enable you to essentially be able to keep access to your wallet in the event that maybe you switch your device gets stolen, or you lose your private key for one reason or the other. So that is something that is technically possible. Moving on to the issue of preventing an individual from having multiple wallets. So this is actually one of the most interesting things about SSID. It's actually very intelligent by design. We assign what we call a decentralized identifier for every wallet that essentially registers on the platform. And what this did is associated with is the set of verifiable credentials or digital credentials that are going to actually be stored within that particular wallet. So it's actually almost counterintuitive to have 3 different wallets, because it's impossible for you to have 3 different EKYC certificates. Only one DID is going to get assigned at EKYC certificate. So SSID, just by the way it's designed, makes it actually very difficult to be extremely miscellaneous or to engage in fraudulent activities that you'd otherwise find in much more centralized architecture. So because of this, it's very much redundant for an individual to set up 3, 4, 5 different wallets, because out of those 5 wallets, only one is actually going to be assigned the credentials themselves. So this is one of the great things about using SSID for that particular application.
Thanks, Victor. Can you also talk us through a few examples of early adopters in any of the regions that you're part of? What kind of experiences did the institutions have? What were the learnings? What were the benefits as a result of implementing SSID? What were the realized benefits of implementing SSID?
Yeah, so one of the earliest, pilots we've engaged on is with one of the commercial banks we have in Zimbabwe. And the purpose of that integration was to amalgamate the EKYC to enable customers to easily upgrade their bank accounts or open new accounts without having to engage in the repetitive paperwork involved. And an interesting note on that, the way that Flex ID itself started was I was myself in the process of trying to open an account, and I couldn't provide my proof of residence. And what this actually meant was I couldn't actually open my account on the same day. I had to go back home. I had to find the utility bill with my name on it. And if I didn't find that utility bill with my name on it, I would have to get an affidavit from my landlord. And the process was just extremely cumbersome. And Flex ID sort of organically materialized from that. And what is interesting is the very bank I went to do this is now the same bank we are working with on this particular integration for EKYC. We've also seen SSID adoption in other parts of the world. In South Africa, there is a bank called ABSA that has been working on SSID again for EKYC. And the way that they are doing it is they've integrated with the Department of their Home Affairs or their Ministry of Home Affairs, which essentially has access to everybody's national ID credentials. So you will be able to automatically get an issued EKYC certificate directly from the Department of Home Affairs in that particular country. So there are multiple other versions in Europe. For example, they're looking at SSID within the banking sector. But as we've found, the greatest opportunity for SSID actually exists in the markets that Sanjay alluded to. So whether you're looking at Africa, whether you're looking at Southeast Asia, these are some of the markets with the highest demand for it. And the reason is simple. In these particular markets and in these economies we find ourselves in, we don't have a lot of legacy systems which have a lot of information about people. The vast majority of our citizens work and operate maybe in the informal sector. So how do you verify the details about a fisherman in Sri Lanka, for example? How do you verify information about an informal trader in the marketplaces of Mombasa in Kenya? So we now have a lot of greenfield projects that we have essentially started to implement with SSID, even in Southeast Asia. I'm sure Sanjay can also allude to some of the work that we've started to do as Flex ID with some of the financial institutions there. And it would be a world first in terms of commercial application and actually commercialization from Southeast Asia. So we are looking forward to it as it's a very exciting project.
I think to add to what Victor said, P. Samarasekara has actually asked a question at a fundamental level. If it is assumed that EKYC, is it necessary, right? Because of the low value of transactions. It is necessary because the unbanked people, they have to go to loan sharks to get their credit. Why hasn't banking gone there? Because of the high cost of deployment of this. So financial inclusion is something very, very important to the world. So in terms of, this is why neobanks and digital identity is going. And spending wise, you're not spending so much as doing central identity systems. This is the advantage Mr. Samarasekara blockchain is bringing in, because you're not spending millions of dollars. Verification can be as cheap as $1 or $2 with a very, very affordable infrastructure cost, because the infrastructure cost is borne on the blockchain. And this is why blockchain is transforming the whole world in this adoption.
Sanjay, I think I can add to that also, to the question on why we should have KYC for this unbanked or underbanked segment. And it's not a matter of low value transactions, because we can't say necessarily that this underbanked or unbanked segment will do low value transactions. We have seen many instances where underbanked or unbanked population is getting by force involved in anti-money laundering and a lot of other activities as well. There was incidents even in Sri Lanka a couple of years back, where very well organized crimes took place in terms of focusing this underbanked and unbanked population, where organized set of people who come and get them to open a bank account and then take their credentials, like their bank account, debit cards, etc., and do transactions, to especially focusing on money laundering and also fraudulent transactions. So I think it's utmost necessary that we should know who is processing the transaction, who is initiating the transaction when it comes to financial services, because otherwise it will be just as equivalent to a cash transaction. And if we don't do the KYC and identify the person, we'll just have a free flow coming in to the digital sector, and we'll simply allow all the money to be laundered by using this particular segment, who might not have real control on or of literacy on what they do in the financial ecosystem, which is a very bad situation to be in.
Yeah. Sandun, a related question to that. It's actually a question from the audience itself, which is about, doesn't the crib already do this function in Sri Lanka in terms of cross-sharing data for KYC? Fundamentally, even if you take a consumer, even in the micro SME sector, there is always a requirement for a credit check, which is usually also done by crib. Isn't there some cross-sharing of data already happening with regards to KYC data in the country?
Yeah, I would think it's very straightforward on what crib does and their mandate. At the moment, they are not really necessarily sharing the KYC data. They are sharing the data relating to your liabilities that you have against the financial institutions. Their data will necessarily will contain about the loans, facilities, and even credit cards that you have with financial institutions in Sri Lanka, and not necessarily the authentication or verifiable data of the individual or the institution. Right? So that is where I don't think at the moment CRIB has enough data elements to conduct a KYC per se. But I would say it's a subset of data that you can have to identify a person, not the entire set of data.
I would like to add something for that. Now, we are talking about the control aspect of the KYC and the identity, right? There's another side of the story. Right? If you really look at, if you know as the institute your customer well, there can be benefits offered, because now why do we do the identity verification and KYC is basically to profile the customer, and based on that profile and also whatever the CRIB provides on the credit information, we basically offer them services and products. Right? More the information you have a better understanding about the customer. So that will leverage all the banks and financial institutes to provide better benefits. So that's also one of the aspects of getting to know the customer. There was a question based on the getting transaction. That is a very valid point. So I think today, if you really look at, most of the fintechs are not looking at the KYC, but that's mainly they're looking at the transaction, because transaction is more valuable than just having past customer data, right? So for us to start that journey, we have to have the identity sorted out. Then the identity should be verified. Then we basically move on with the transactional data, because transactional data is the, let's say, the future money lies on transactional data. That's something I want to add.
Thanks, Kanishka. There is also a related question around that, which was with regard to an initiative from the central bank a few years ago. I think there was a pilot done for EKYC. Are you able to shed some light on that initiative, Kanishka? That's one of the questions from the audience.
Right. So I think we've had certain projects initiated from central bank point of view in terms of getting EKYC implemented. It was launched as a pilot project with some of the private as well as government banks in order to see whether a workable model can be built. I think still it has not gone as a public live project, but there has been certain development. There has been some good learnings we've done through that initiative to understand how the data normalization and how the verification process should happen, and also how the sharing process should happen between the institutions, right? But still again, there are certain gray areas, also the ownership of data, whether a financial institute who has onboarded a customer, can they basically share the data to another financial institute? So those are some of the areas that we still need to get ironed out. So that's where I think as far as central bank is concerned. But the good thing is Sri Lankan Central Bank has taken that initiative a couple of years back, and they are positive on looking at blockchain-based shared KYC platform in the country. So that's, I think, a very positive initiative.
Got it. Kanishka, also from a regulatory perspective, how do you think a regulator would look at an initiative like SSID? What would be the benefits for a regulator? So, for an example, the question from the audience is that if the user owns and holds the ID, is this something the regulator will be okay? Is this, how do you see that planning out?
Now, so one of the misconceptions a lot of people think is the data should be kept with the bank or the financial institution that you deal, right? Now, actually, if you really look at all these data is belong to the customer, right? Your identity, even if you look at transactional data is belong to the customer. If you look at most of the European countries, that is where they've opened up the open banking and a lot of technologies, because that particular data asset belongs to the customer. you are basically a custodian as a financial institution holding it because the transaction is going through you. Right? So if you look at on a regulator's point of view, I think it is going to be pretty much of a ease out situation for the regulator, because if you have a one identity system around the country, so a person would basically provide his details first. So that is the initiation point. Then there will be a verifier. So verifiers will become all the institutions. It can be a bank, it can be a financial institution, it can even be a telco, right? Any institution who is basically onboarding the customer would be a verifier, right? Once the verifier has verified, it will create a common ID for the citizen. So that ID is the ID where it will be traced in any financial store, anything, anywhere they go. So in that point, the regulator only has to trace that ID, and basically, if they wanted to inquire on something, they can simply identify. Now, today we have the national identity card number, but you know the scams around the national identity card number. Now, even it becomes worse when you have the old ID and the new ID, because one is 10 digits and the other one is less than that, and people try to manipulate around that. So that is where regulator will be very comfortable. A lot of manipulations will stop, and this will lead to fraud prevention, because fraud is one of the biggest headache regulator has today. So fraud prevention is one of the key achievements coming from a fintech. I would say that we can achieve through this.
Thanks. Another interesting question from the audience is that, just give me 1 second. I'm just going to pick this question up. Is data storing in a blockchain, is this regulated? Is this allowed by government? Sanjay, you want to take that question?
Yes, Simran. So if you look at the standards here in GDPR #1, it is governed by many governments, right? And most of the SSID projects are built on government standards, as you and then if you look at any data protection regulation which happens is also governed by the W3C standards. So then those standards work very closely with most governments which give the approval. And I think Victor can share a little bit about the bodies that we are working with in terms of establishing a standardized identity on the blockchain. So it is happening, and governments are in the process of evaluating, as Kanishk also said, central bank ran a POC. It is in the process of going forward in terms of legislatively approving it, but digital identity is something which is run, especially in Europe, using GDPR standards. And as long as the solution conforms to this level, global level, it's above the governments actually, that then they become recognized and approved by governments as well, because these are pushed by the UN, IMF, and so many other bodies. And this is why Algorand again stands out, because the founder of Algorand, who is Silvio Misali, is actually was a guy who got awarded the Turing Award, which is like the Oscars of the tech world, for the Algorand blockchain infrastructure and the security it creates. So that is why, if I'm not mistaken, Victor can confirm this, Algorand is a part of the global identity consortium as a consultant in spreading this in the world.
Thanks, Sanjay. Thanks, Sanjay, for that.
Sadhu, add on to what Sanjay was saying.
Yeah, go ahead.
You find with SSID, it drastically overcompensates for what the majority of the GDPR and other global privacy regulations require, because it is arguably the most enhanced way of decentralizing personal data. There is no other way, there is no infrastructure that guarantees 100% control of one's personal information, whilst also guaranteeing a high level of security. In other words, a platform like Flex ID is virtually impossible for you to be able to retrieve anyone's personal identifiable information. Just by that design, whether it's a rogue government, whether it's a hacker, whether it's any other nefarious participant, they would not be able, for example, to change any information as they easily would with a centralized system. It's also very difficult to shut down because it's decentralized. So even if you leave Sri Lanka and you go to Canada or you go to the United States, your Flex ID and its credentials are still going to be extremely valid, and they can still be verifiable by a number of other different participants on the network. So it does comply to those extremely high standards. And Flex ID is part of the Decentralized Identity Foundation, which has been creating the standards for decentralized ID. We are also part of the World Economic Forum and W3C. So we have been developing Flex ID for interoperable standards across the world, such that regardless of where you are, from Nepal to Maldives to Singapore to Sri Lanka, Flex ID is still going to be interoperable across all those different regions.
Thanks, Victor. Thanks for those insights. Sadhu, a quick question to you. Obviously, we've been obviously focusing a lot around the financial services industry in this session. Let me kind of shift the coin a little bit. As MasterCard, you work with a lot of merchants who accept credit card payments or debit card payments, right? Now, in that context, given the sheer number of merchants that you work with, not only in Sri Lanka, but globally, how do you see the applicability of SSID coming in from a merchant standpoint?
Yeah, so it's one side, Imran. It's about giving the better user experience to the consumers of these merchants, because at the moment, what happens is consumers have to individually build their profiles within the merchants. Like if you look at even local e-commerce websites, etc., or even a fintech application, I would say a wallet or whatever, or in the global context, the consumers have to build their profile from the scratch, and then you have to provide all the necessary information for you to get into the platform to do transactions. But however, if we have a better consumer experience to get them onboarded easily, and also to allow them to store credentials in a secure way to authenticate whenever they want with the relevant information, I think the consumer experience would be much better, and definitely that would be a big plus point to get the consumers into the e-commerce business and also the wallets. As an example, in Sri Lanka, if you look at statistically, at the moment only 6% of the population does e-commerce transactions today, right? Which is quite low. So if we can give a better experience to the consumer who may not be really technically advanced, if they can simply do transactions on a mobile, which we have a very good infrastructure considering the mobile penetration and the smartphone penetration. I think that will be a very good value addition to onboard the customer. Forget about the payment for that matter, but at least to get them to digitally do business. Imran.
Thanks, Adunzo. Essentially, the biggest benefit is the consumer creates a profile once, but then has the ability to use it across multiple applications, multiple merchants without having to recreate everything from scratch for each merchant.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you, Sadhu. Very interesting insight. There's also a few questions around the Department of Registrations, shouldn't they create a system to interface citizen data with private companies? Obviously, there is a lot of initiatives in the country with regards to building a national ID or a unique ID system as well. Where do you think SSID-like concepts can complement such initiatives? Anyone could take this question.
I'll take the first part. Sorry, Sanjay, go ahead.
Yeah, you take the first part.
Okay. So on the initiative where the Department of Personal Registration, they have now a service, a web service, where institution can, by entering a national identity card number, verify the information which the customer has provided. Basically, simply by entering the number, they can see the address, the photograph, as well as the other relevant information which is required. So that phase has been already implemented, and it has been given to banks, insurance companies, and finance companies for them to verify it. The second stage, as far as I know, they're going to give a service which probably banks, in terms of doing a robotic process automation, they can basically plug in the service and do the verification part. So that's yet to come up. Sanjay, you can take the second part.
So I think the continuing from that, right, the biggest advantage, disadvantage actually. Let's talk about two of the leading global identity systems, right? Forget Google and Facebook. Look at the Singapore Pass and look at the Aadhaar system. Aadhaar system is the official digital identity platform for India. Right? It has got hacked. There are instances that people have hacked into it, taken the information, and it has been sold in the black market for little as $500. Right? This is not what I'm saying. You can check it out on the news reports. The reason being, it is centrally governed. Singapore, as you know, is always a couple of steps ahead of the rest of the world when it comes to tech development. And they recently actually sent out an RFP exploring of converting the Singapore Pass into a SSID solution, right? And Hong Kong, which is again quite an advanced tech hub in the world, is already doing corporate SSID. They have launched a pilot between trade happening from China and Hong Kong on e-commerce platforms to happen on SSID. So in terms of adoption and mitigating threats, the whole solution and the roadmap is on the way. And I think even if you look at MasterCard, right, Sadhu may be able to confirm, even they are exploring SSID in a global scale, right? So that's the roadmap for how SSID is going to go.
Thanks, Sanjay. We are almost at the end of the session. Before we wind up, can I ask each of the panelists to give a quick 30-second final wrap-up of your thoughts around how Sri Lanka should essentially look at SSID, and what kind of journey can we charter, especially in Sri Lanka, the Sri Lankan institutions, both financial services and non-financial services. What kind of advice, inputs can you provide in terms of adoption of SSID-like technology? Maybe I can start with Victor.
Yeah, so Sri Lanka has an opportunity to be one of the very first countries in the world to drastically improve on their efficiency and optimization by adopting SSID, not just within the financial sector, but within other sectors as well, whether it's telecoms, whether it's insurance, whether it's even government or even trade. in the trade industry. So, definitely we advise companies, we advise public institutions, we advise banks to essentially, sort of create a model on how best they can trial SSID for sandboxes, whilst also sort of allowing a soft deployment of SSID across a particular demographic of their choosing. This, in no doubt, in the next few months and years, will have tremendous benefits in terms of just the capital gains from all the efficiency benefits.
Thanks, Victor. Sandhu, do you want to share a few quick final comments?
Yeah, Imran. I'll say why any institution should consider a blockchain-based SSID-like technology for this purpose. One is that you give your customers or your consumers, individuals or the organization that you work with, a greater hold and also the possibility of managing and controlling their own identities. And also, as I said earlier, you kind of get rid of, from the consumer's perspective, you get rid of the risk of abandoned identities, and looking at the entire ecosystem, these are public but permissioned networks. So even though one could argue that data could be seen, not everybody would be able to modify this data unless you have permission. So looking at the privacy, verifiable credentials, decentralized identifiers, and also the scale, bringing in the interoperability between different players, and also the security, as Victor said, pseudonymous pairwise identifiers that you have. I think it makes a very good case for anybody to consider a blockchain-based SSID-like technology for the identification authentication purpose. So I think I'll stop there.
Sanjay, followed by Kanishka.
I think all of us have actually shown the importance of this, and also based on a few questions, they've all asked about the financial side of it, right? What I would like to mention, this is not EK when it comes to a digital identity and a proper identification. It is not only for transactions. It is your hospital data. It is your education certification. It could be even a club membership. Right? If you realize Harvard and Yale being one of the most popular universities in the world, people dock their certificates. The next one, actually, Victor and I are speaking to some countries in Africa, elections, right? When it comes to blockchain, every country, right? People might laugh in Sri Lanka. It's not only Sri Lanka. People stormed into the White House saying the elections results were not right? These are the things that self-sovereign ID can solve in the long run of the roadmap. So it is not only to do with financial transactions. It is to have an immutable identification where somebody can't have 3 IDs, because we know that happens, right? You lose your license, you can go to the police station, make an entry and get a new license. There are people who have 2 driver's licenses because they found the old one, right? And when you give the old one, you get copped, you forget about it, you can use the other one for a while, right? These are things that actually happen. But if it is in the blockchain, they know it is lost and there is a record, and you can't have this type of identity, multiple identity, because even elections, when you go for voting, and again, I reiterate, this is not only in Sri Lanka, this is a global phenomenon. One person can't vote 10 times, right? Because it is in the blockchain. Victor, I think, can touch on before closing what he is doing for prescription drugs in Africa.
Sanjay, we might have to save that for another day. Yeah. Victor, if you can just maybe in 10-15 seconds since you're close to wrap up. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, so you can essentially now have a credible online pharmacy or an online drugstore, because we can actually now verify credentials, prescription credentials directly from your healthcare provider or your doctor without having to do any other physical relay. So it opens up the market for online purchases of drugs, which by itself will open up massive revenue streams. So definitely that's something.
Great. Kanishk, any final thoughts from you as well?
Right. Coming from the fintech background, I think it's a leapfrog for the country, because if we have a smart digital verifiable identity system, there can be a lot of innovations and trusted financial products and services built on that. So it's one of the essential parts for most of the fintechs, in terms of rather than going through the rigorous process of verifying users, simply you can digitally verify a customer and they can build on that to offer better services. So that's where I think I see a very bright horizon with SSID.
Thank you, Kanishka. Thank you for that. I think it's been a wonderful discussion with a wonderful set of panelists. A privilege to have. I think that's it from us today. Bridge Advisory and Consulting, thank you very much for having me and also organizing this session. And thank you once again for the audience who have been patiently listening to us for the last hour or so. And last but not least, thank you once again for the panelists for providing much needed insight, wonderful perspective, wonderful experiences of how Sri Lanka can benefit, or institutions in Sri Lanka can benefit, and the value of SSID technology. Thank you very much. Have a great day all.
Thanks a lot, guys. See you.
Thank you.